Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Sardar Patel Institute of Economic and Social Research. Today we will be studying the module Growth of Human Being from Conception to Senescence under the paper Human Growth, Development and Nutrition. So as we all know that human life cycle undergoes different phases of life. And these phases are nothing but the stages through which an individual passes over the time. So in order to understand the growth at these different stages, we need to study how and when there are the changes in those stages and what are the changes. The entire human life cycle can be broadly categorized in two categories or two groups, we can say. That is the prenatal and the postnatal growth. The prenatal growth or prenatal life, we can say, begins with the conception, and the postnatal life cycle begins with the birth of a child. The learning objective of this particular modules, like what we are going to learn after completing this particular module, is to understand or to define what is growth and development in a human life cycle, to identify the different phases of human life cycle, to name those life cycle phases, and to understand how does growth and development takes place at the different specific phases of the human life cycle. And besides this, we are supposed to understand the physical and the physiological changes along with these different stages of life. All these stages of the human life cycle can be understood in the terms of the biological changes, that is the physical, physiological and the sexual maturation or sexual changes during the different life cycle, and to understand those changes in the terms of the psychological and the social aspect as well. So let's begin with the first stage of the human life cycle, that is the prenatal stage of the human life cycle. As we can see, this is a pictorial representation of the human life cycle. The human life cycle is said to be beginning with the fertilization, and that fertilized egg gives rise to the fetus. After the fertilization, it proceeds through the prenatal growth and the development, followed by birth, postnatal growth and development, then maturity, senescence and ultimately the death. So fertilization can be marked as the beginning of the life and the cycle continuously passing through the fixed stages, ending the cycle at the last stage, that is the death. So human life cycle involves the two broad stages, that is the prenatal stage before the birth and the postnatal stage, that is the after the birth of a child. At individual level, we can see this old cell die and degrade, and the molecular constituents of these dead cells are recycled into the new cells through the process of mitosis. While at the population level, the people born, grow, mature, passes through the old age and ultimately die. This shows us the stages of the prenatal growth of the human body, and these prenatal stages can be further categorized into three broad categories, that is embryonic stage, which is otherwise also called as the first trimester of the pregnancy, and which start with the conception of the zygote to the 8th week of the pregnancy. Then the second is the early fetal stage, which is also classified as the second trimester of the pregnancy, and it begins with the 9th week of pregnancy and lasts till the 24th week of pregnancy. And the third stage of the prenatal phase is the late fetal stage, which is the third trimester of the pregnancy, and it begins with the 25th week and goes till the baby is born. Now let's come to the postnatal of the human life cycle. The postnatal begins with the infancy stage. The infancy stage can be specifically categorized into three broad categories: the neonatal stage, the infancy proper, and the late infancy stage. The neonatal period is the period which is from birth to the first month of a child. The child is called in the neonatal stage. And then from second month onward till the completion of 1 year, it's infancy proper. And from the second year beginning, or the entire second year, has been classified under the late infancy phase of the human life cycle. The second broad category of the postnatal growth of the human life cycle is the childhood stage, which can be specifically categorized into three broader categories, that is the early childhood, middle childhood, and the late childhood. The early childhood is from 3rd year to 6th years, and the middle childhood can be broadly categorized from age 7 to age 10 years, and then late childhood we can say begins from 10 year onward, after the completion of 10 year, until the puberty. The age at puberty generally varies with the different population and with the different gender also. And then next bigger or the important stage is the adolescent stage, which begins with the marking of the puberty, or and it's 6 years following the puberty age is classified under the adolescent stage. Generally, it ranges from 12 to 15 years for the girls, and 13 to 16 years for the boys is classified as the age of puberty. Ranging at these categories, the child, whether a boy or a girl, can attain the puberty stage. Then next come to the adulthood stage, which begins with the 19 year onwards, and it goes till 50 years. It depends on the different type of classifications given by different scientists. So adulthood stage, however, begins with the age of 19 year onwards or 20 year onwards. Then it follows till 60 years, and as per Indian classifications, the people of 60 years and above had been classified as elderly. But the broad human life cycle can be demarcated with the senescence stage, which generally is the declining changes in the human body parts or the functioning. And senescence can be marked after 40 year onward or after 50 year onward. So there is not specific age which has been given as the age of beginning of senescence, but research has shown that there are declining changes after 40 years of age of an individual. This pictorial representation shows the stages of development in the prenatal stage of the growth. As we can see from these pictures, that the embryonic stage, which lasts from the conception to the first 8th week of the pregnancy, during this period the cell of the embryo repeatedly divides and the embryo embeds itself into the wall of the womb of the mother. And this embedding begins by the end of the 3rd week, and it completes during the 4th week of the pregnancy. By 5th week of the pregnancy, the development of the brain, spinal cord and heart is well underway. The heart starts beating, is visible by the ultrasound almost immediately, and then by the 6th week, the heart is pumping the embryo's own blood to his or her brain and the body. By the 6th week, the embryo measures less than 1/4 of an inch long from head to the rump. And by this time, the arms and legs are easily seen, as we could see from these pictures. The fingers are also beginning to form on the hand by the end of the 6th week of the pregnancy. Now, during the 2nd trimester, the early fetal stage started. The movement of the hands, neck turns and the hiccups begin. The heart by now is nearly fully formed. Girls now have the ovaries and the boys have the testes. All the fingers and toes are free and are fully formed. And experts estimates that the 10th week embryo possesses approximately 90% of the body part found in the adults. So majority of the body parts have been formed by the 10th week of the pregnancy. After 10th week, the developing human is called the fetus actually, which means the little one or the unborn offspring. The fingerprints start forming at the 12th week, while the fingernails and the toenails begins to grow. The gender difference emerged by the 16th week, when the girl fetuses move their jaws more than the boys. Pregnant women may begin to feel the fetal movement at this time. Around the 17th week, the blood cell formation moves to its permanent location, that is inside the bone marrow, and fetus begins storing the energy in the form of body fat. By 18th week, the formation of the breathing passage called the bronchial tree is complete. At the 21st week, the breathing patterns, body movement and heart rate begins to follow the daily cycle called the circadian rhythms. By 22nd week, the sense of hearing begins to function and the fetus start responding to the different sounds. Between 20 and the 23rd week, the rapid eye movement begin in the fetus. The third trimester, which is marked from the 25th week onward, which is also called as late fetal stage, is characterized by the movement of the blinking of the fetus by the loud noises. By 34 weeks, true alveoli or the air pockets in the lungs begins developing. By 37th week, the fetus has a firm hand grip and the heart rate, and the baby is by the 38 week fetus weighs about 6 by 3/4 of the pound and it measures about 19 inches from head to heel. The labor is basically initiated by the fetus around 40th week, which is responsible for the or initiation for the childbirth. The newborn babies typically weighs between the 6 to 9 pound or the 3 to 4 kg. This measure between the 18 to 20 inches from head to the heel, or the length of the fetus is between 18 to 20 inches by this time. The important changes during the gestation period can be characterized by the important phenomena like the cleavage, which takes place after the fertilization, and it is the first cell division in the zygote. Then implantation of the ovum, where the growing zygote attaches to the mother's uterine and mother starts giving nutrition to the zygote or to the growing baby. The many folds of the growth occurs and the growth of cells is very fast during this period. The formation of the germs layer takes place in the gestation period. The formation of embryonic organs like limbs, heart, lung keeps on going during this particular phase. The fetal organ formation is the development from one chamber heart to the four chamber heart also takes place in the gestation period only. And the fetal development progresses from every main part or the organ. As we have already seen by now or learnt by now that early fetal stage, the organs are found to be quite distinguished and there is an increase in the length of the fetus. By the end of the 6th month, the fetus attains the 70% of its birth length and 20% of its birth weight. And this early fetal stage is considered to be the most stable period of the pregnancy. The late fetal stage is marked by the increase in the mass or the weight of the fetus. Very less increase in the linear dimension or length of the baby takes place because already 70% of the length has been taken place. This is basically the weight gaining period, and hence the diet of the mother need to be very proper during the late fetal stage of the fetus development. This shows a pictorial representation of the fetal development week by week, and it shows the progression from the zygote to a full-term baby. We can see from this picture that how zygote is formed by the first week of pregnancy, and then it gets implanted to the mother uterus, and then we can see the organs formation, which is specified as the organogenesis, the formation of different organs is taking place in the fetus. The eye, ear, heart and all these external body parts can be seen in the body development of a fetus. We can easily see like the brain development has taken place by the 16th week, and by the 20th week to the 36th week, we can see the full brain development could be seen, and a full term baby is there by the 38th week of the pregnancy. So this shows us the complete development from a zygote to a newborn baby. The infancy stage, if we talk about, is like the changes are very rapid, but those changes are not as rapid as during the prenatal stage when the child is inside the womb of the mother. The infancy stage is slightly slower, but for the postnatal period, this is infancy stage is the period of the rapid changes in the human life cycle. During the infancy stage, the rate of growth is quite fast, and it's basically is a nutrition dependent stage of the human life cycle. Like as per the nutritional intake, there are the accordingly changes in the human body or in an infant. During infancy stage, various reflexes like sucking and grasping and stepping develops in an infant. However, the vision is quite poor among the infants. The infants also shows the change in the birth weight and in the change in the length, which are quite rapid at this particular infancy stage. It almost double in the change in the length of a child, and almost 50% is the change in the weight of an infant during this infancy stage. The nervous system also develop quite faster, and thereby the different reflex action develop at this particular stage. This table shows us the physical development during the infancy stage, that is after the birth of the baby. And as we can see from this table, that by the 3rd month of the infant stage, the infant can sit with their head held steady for a few seconds if given a support. And by the 6th month, the infant have the more strength in the muscle control, so they can lift their heads on their own, all without the support, and they can turn their head to look around. They can also pull themselves up with their hands grasp. By the 9th month of the infancy stage, they can sit without a support for about 10 minutes. They are starting to move independently or trying to move independently by rolling down or by the skimping. They can pull themselves to stand and can stand holding onto the support for few moments. By the 12th month of the infancy, the infant can get from a lying to a sitting position without any help. They can crawl rapidly. They can walk by holding onto the furniture and stand alone for a few moments. So by the infancy proper, these are the development which we could see in an infant. From 15th month, the infant can get on their feet alone without any help. They can walk and they can crawl upstairs, so they can step over also. And by the 18th month of the infancy, they can run and they can move upstairs and they can crawl downstairs. And by the end of the infancy stage, that is by the 2 years, the infant can walk downstairs. And though during the infancy stage, these are the physical and the behavioral changes which you can see. And by the 3rd year, the infants can play and can climb on the equipments, ride a bicycle, and throw and catch a ball. So these all show the physical and the behavioral changes in the infants during the infancy stage. As we can see from this picture, that this shows the emergence of the deciduous dentition or the primary teeth emergence, which allow the infant to switch from the dependence on breast or the infant food to the eating an appropriate weaning food. The infants will erupt the 5 deciduous teeth in each quadrant of their mouth, that is the central incisors, lateral incisors, canine, first molar and the second molar. The emergence of the last deciduous teeth, usually molar 2, signals the end of the infancy. This picture shows the eruption of the teeth of the basically primary teeth during the different months and shedding of those teeth by the childhood stage, so that the permanent teeth eruption can begin by that stage of the childhood. So each and every the emergence of the primary teeth and the shedding of those primary teeth has been clearly shown in this picture. Now the second major phase of the postnatal growth of a child is the childhood stage. The childhood stage, as we have already talked about, is broadly categorized into early childhood, middle childhood and late childhood. Now let's begin with the early childhood stage, which ranges from year 3 to year 6 of a child. If we talk about the growth during this childhood stage, the rate of growth decreases during the early childhood, or it slows down, we can say. The growth is slowed down by the third year and become little stable, but the body keeps on consistently growing or increasing in the length as well as in the body weight, though these changes are quite slower as compared to the infancy stage. The learning ability which was launched in the first year becomes faster as child exposed to the new environment, and all the psychomotor skills are enhancing, and there is a muscle coordination which allows the child to run, climb and move freely. The speech also developed during this particular phase, which is learned, and child recognizes some letter and some small words. The teeth eruption also begins during this important stage, and the short attention span is also noticed among the children during this particular stage. So early childhood, we can say, is an important phase during the entire childhood stage to develop the social, psychological and biological changes to be developed at this particular stage. We can see the middle childhood ranging from the age 7 years to 10 years, as we have understood that this is the most stable period of the childhood, because all the changes are consolidated and there is a differential rate of growth during the middle childhood. And by the 9th year, the body proportion of the growing child changes. The mid-growth spurt, a short-term acceleration in the height and weight, is experienced by the children during this stage before the onset of the adolescent growth spurt. However, the variability in the intensity of the growth can be seen in the different child. This mid-growth spurt, which takes place during the middle childhood, occurs between 6.5 to 8.5 years, and it again varies in different child. However, it occurs more frequently in the boys than in the girls. During this period, the replacement of the milk teeth by the permanent teeth is almost complete, with the exception of the second molar, which stays during this period. And by this stage, the growth of the brain is almost 95%. So, middle childhood is considered to be a crucial stage of the growth of an individual. The last phase of the childhood, that is the late childhood, which starts from 10th year onward till the attainment of the puberty among the children. This phase is influenced by the growth of the sex hormones. It can be called as the prepubertal stage, and it marks the beginning of the adolescent growth spurt and sexual dimorphism in the body size and proportion during the prepubertal stage. The linear growth under the influence of these hormones is quite rapid during this phase. There is a sudden increase in the linear dimensions, which is called as the adolescent spurt. And during this phase, the complex motor sensory coordination keeps taking place, like understanding of the abstract concepts, enhanced reading, writing and speech are at the best during this phase, and all these indicators shows that physically dependent child is moving to an independent stage during the late childhood phase of the human cycle. Now let's come to the adolescence phase of the human life cycle. Adolescence, as we all know by now, that is a transition phase between the childhood and the adulthood. And adolescence is a quite crucial stage because this is the period during which the puberty is attained by a girl or a boy. In this phase of the human life cycle, there are quite distinction between the males and the female body size, shape and the form. For instance, say boys have the more broader shoulders, they have more muscles development, while the girls have more fat deposition, they have narrower shoulders and they have broader hips. During this particular phase, there is a change in the physique and change in the body, and body is supposed to gain the weight during this particular phase with the deposition of more fat in both boys as well as in the girls, though this fat deposition is slightly more in the girls. During this particular phase, the sexual maturity is also attained by the boy and the girl. The onset of oogenesis begins among the girls and spermatogenesis begins among the boys. Oogenesis, that means that egg formation start taking place among the girls and sperm formation takes place among the boys. So the sexual maturity, we can talk about sexual maturity is being attained at this particular phase. There is a clear demarcation in the change of the voice of the boys during this particular phase, and among the girls the menarche cycle begins 6 weeks period following the puberty. So the quite distinct demarcation in the body size, shape and form takes place in the boys and girls during the adolescent phase of the human life cycle. This graphical representation shows us the peak velocity height curve for the girls and the boys, showing the increase in the stature expressed in the unit of centimeters per year. As we can see, this PHV, that is the peak height velocity, this shows the maturation, which is signaled by the rapid acceleration in the growth velocity of virtually all skeleton tissues, which indicates the adolescent growth spurt. An increase in the growth velocity marks the commencement of the adolescent spurt. The growth rate, which eventually reaches a maximum, is articulated as a peak height velocity and which gradually decline. As we can see from this graph that it is slightly higher for the boys as compared to that of the girls, and though this age by which the peak height velocity is attained among the girls is little lesser age as compared to that of the boys, so that girls attains the peak height velocity before the boys attains the peak height velocity. The adulthood stage. As we can see that it's difficult to determine exactly when adulthood commences, and but on general, adulthood is for the most people the time of the peak physical capacity. The body reaches the full height by the late teens and the physical strength increases into the late 20s and early 30s. The attainment of the adult stature and sexual maturation are the indicators of the transition from adolescence to the adulthood. The height stops as the long bones of the body, like femur, lose their ability to increase in the length. A process called the epiphyseal union, in which the growing end of the bones fuse with that of diaphysis, that is the shaft of the bone, under the stimulation of the gonadal hormones, has taken place to attain the skeletal maturity during the adulthood stage. It is generally identified as the 18 years among the females and 20 years among the males, and it can also be recognized as the period of childbearing age. And the bones and the muscular development, as we have already specified, is already completed in this stage. The middle adulthood stage or the middle age, which is generally demarcated from 40 years onwards till the 65 years of age. This is identified or characterized by the decline in the muscle toning, and it also marks with the gray hair or the wrinkling of the skin. And other physical features which demarcate the middle adulthood are the loss of hearing and the visual acuity loss. And during this period, there are most probability of gaining the weight. So these are the few characteristics feature of the middle age. The senescence phase of the human life cycle, which can also be called as the late adulthood, or generally marked by the individual who are 65 years and above. This phase is also known as the declining phase or the phase of the negative growth. At the age of 60 years, there is a decline in the stature because of the compression of the vertebral disc of the vertebral column. The memory loss can occur and reasoning ability may diminish. During this particular phase, the mineralization of the bones increases and thereby bones may become brittle and they become more susceptible or prone to the fracture. There is some decline in the functional capacity. There is a dentition or the loss of teeth can be seen, and by this age there is a loss in the hearing and the vision loss, and the person become more susceptible to the illness or the health issues because there is a decline in the functional capacity, there decrease in the water content, and the immune system becomes weaker and muscles starts deteriorating. So senescence can be actually classified as the phase of the negative growth in the human life cycle. So students, let's summarize what we have learned from this particular module of the growth from conception to the senescence. As we have learned by now that human life cycle is passing through different phases of life, and those phases can be classified as the prenatal phases and the postnatal phases. The prenatal phases are those phases which are taking place before the birth of a child, and the postnatal phases are those phases which are marked with the beginning of the birth of the child, and following the birth of the child the changes have been classified as postnatal phases. During all those phases there are social, physical, psychological, emotional and cognitive changes taking place in the individual. During these phases, the prenatal phases, as we all learnt, is the before the birth of the child, but the postnatal phases can be defined as the infancy stage, childhood stage, adolescence, adulthood, and then there is an elderly stage, which is characterized by the senescence and the different body functions and the physiological changes. The infancy stage, as we have learnt, is clearly demarcated into three broad categories, that is the neonatal period and the proper infancy and the late infancy. And childhood accordingly is or similarly classified into three broad groups, that is the early childhood, middle childhood and the late childhood. And then adolescence is a transition period between the adulthood and the childhood, which is characterized by the onset of the puberty or the peak of the growth period during the postnatal period. Though the changes are not as rapid as the changes in the infancy stage, but this is the second phase of the highest growth in the postnatal period. Then senescence shows a decline in the body functions and the structures, along with the social, psychological and emotional changes with the old age. So thank you, student.